Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey friends, we want to thank you for joining us once again at the E2 Effective Elders podcast. And we always say thank you to CDF Capital for their outrageously generous support of our ministry. They make this podcast possible and so much more through the ministry of E2. Thank you, CDF, for your partnership. And in 2022, we are sharing with one another a good word of some kind, some way, a good word. And what we want to in this episode is focus one last time on that word hope. All of April has been about hope, and somebody who's going to help us with that is Reid Presnell, a good brother and friend in Jesus. Reid, thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a privilege, buddy. Reid is a friend who he and his wife, Angie, and their sons have been a part of Indian Creek Christian Church, the Creek, for decades. And Reid is a professional coach. He is a leadership coach. He's done a great deal of work in that field. I believe that Reid could be a stand-up comedian on any late-night television show. If anybody has the gift of spontaneous humor, it is Reid, and he passed it down to his sons. His sons have made me laugh so hard, I've cried at CIY events. So anyway, Reid, we want to welcome you. And would you tell us a little bit about your story, please?
Sure. So I started my coaching business, as you mentioned, 5 years ago. Left a long career of 20 plus years as an HR director. Was very excited, and life has been going really well. The business was going great. And then last May to June timeframe, started not feeling so great. Had tried some new meds, and they took some labs and found that my hemoglobin was extremely low. And so that continued to just go lower and lower, and I could not get in for tests that I needed to have done. And so in July, based on a lab phone call to my doctor, they asked me to go to the ER, and I had to have a blood transfusion. And they admitted me, and it was not Labor Day, 4th of July weekend. Not the way I wanted to spend my 4th of July. I was admitted on July 3rd and spent all 4th of July weekend in the hospital. But I'll talk a little bit about how I feel like that was also God working and how that came about. But I was diagnosed on the 5th of July with a rare form of cancer called ampullary cancer. Most people that get it are in their 70s. I got it at 50. And it was something that required an extremely aggressive surgery called what they call a Whipple, where they basically, it had to be an IU surgeon that specialized in that. And I had to undergo surgery on July 15th. And they removed several parts of my whole digestive system and had to reroute and remove part of my intestine, all kinds of things. And so it was, I think it was around a 6-hour surgery, and spent a while in IU Med Center. Probably, I think I was in there about 6 days, and then had a long recovery ahead. And part of it is permanent fatigue, inability to digest things like that. So life within a matter of a couple days totally changed. And that diagnosis on the 5th was not what we expected. We expected I'm on blood thinner for AFib, and we expected they were going to tell me there was a blood vessel leaking some blood, and nothing like what they did. And I'll talk a little bit more about that experience of even finding out and how I feel like God was there.
Yeah. So. Well, and then too, in addition to the surgery, you had then follow-up other cancer treatment with that, right?
Yes, chemo and radiation. It was in 6 of 22 lymph nodes that they removed. So as a precaution, because it could have started spreading, I had chemo, and then I had radiation as well. Ended that on January the 7th. And then I had to have a follow-up surgery to repair. The incision had come open internally. and just had a surgery. It'll be 3 weeks tomorrow to get that repaired. And so that was a big blessing to be able to finally get that done as well, because that's been difficult to deal with on top of everything else.
Yeah, on top of everything else, you bet. Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit, because we really do know that you have much to teach us about hope in the midst of sudden storms that are serious, that are life-threatening. And in what ways have you seen God at work in the midst of your storm of life, your situation?
I believe that even the day that I got the call, we were at dinner with friends when I got the call from the lab. And we were on the north side, and I will never forget, because our friends were just like, you need to go now. We're going to go to Community South. We'll drive your car. We'll drive your car home. We'll get our car, bring your car back to the hospital. I mean, I felt like God just really used the people in my life from that moment on to just really help. I believe him getting me into the hospital when he did. When I saw the gastroenterologist, he said, they were booked out till August at this point. And when he saw me, he said, we're going to do this on Monday so we can figure out what this is. And so had I not been admitted, that would have never happened. I would have lost that time. And I think that was important. I think the day of the endoscopy, unfortunately, because it was the 4th of July holiday, they couldn't get an anesthesiologist. And so they asked if I'd be willing to let the gastroenterologist do the actual anesthesia through just like a conscious sedation for the endoscopy and the biopsies. And I said yes, and it was fine. He's a phenomenal physician, but I will tell you that I was aware of what was going on, and I heard him say, let me back up. As they were wheeling me into this area, a song that has been very close to my heart, and before this happened, and as I was being wheeled, that I was singing in my head was "The Goodness of God." All my life, you've been good to me. You've been faithful. And I was singing in my head. I was singing that, and I was like, God, no matter what this is, you're still good, no matter what that is. And I want everybody in this story to know that you're still good, regardless of what's going on. And we were in there, and I heard him say, I'm biopsying this. There's a mass. And I remember in the midst of being awake enough to hear, there was still a peace that I feel like God gave me in that moment. And they wheeled me into the recovery. Nobody's working because it's a holiday weekend. And Angie and one of our close friends, it's like a sister to me, they were in there waiting. And I said, he found a mass. I heard him. And he came in and he almost was crying. The doctor, he was very caring. And he said, I am so sorry. He said, I never would have expected this. He goes, there's an area, I believe it's cancer. There's a mass at the duodenum at the top of the small intestine. This is a big surgery, like an IU Med Center. It's nothing. I mean, it was very overwhelming in that moment. And the emotion, obviously, I was very emotional. And my wife was emotional. My friend that's like a sister, Nancy, was very emotional in that moment. But I had a peace about it at the same time. So even though it was, and I remember the first words I said to my wife was, I wanted to be a grandfather. Like that is something that I want. And even though in that moment, that was all I was processing, there was a peace. And we got back to the room, and several of our, what I call 2 a.m. friends, were all there in that room to support me, to pray with me, offer, what can we get you for, because I hadn't eaten forever, and just loving on us. And even friends that were out of town were calling in to check. And then I had to have the difficult conversation to call my boys and tell them. And that was extremely hard for me. But again, God gave me the words. He gave me peace. And everybody was like, are you okay? And I'm somebody that's an anxious person a lot of times. And I said, I don't really have a lot of anxiety because I feel like God's given me peace. And it is what it is. Like, this is one of the things you worry about when you have anxiety. And this is what I'm dealing with right now. And just pressed into God, and I could feel his presence through those next few days in the hospital, dealing with the physicians. And one thing I tried to do with all the physicians and caregivers that I've worked with is to just be an example of Christ in that. Because a lot of patients are the easiest. And I've had nurses just share, like, you're so in the midst of all this, and it's like, what good does it do for me to give them? They're overworked and stretched, and I want to be an example through this. And I told Angie that when I found out. I said, no matter what, he is still good, and I want people to see that. I don't want anybody to think, well, that's changed now because of this diagnosis. And so I feel like those things are all things I saw him working in, and the boys and Angie have been amazing at dealing with it and supportive. The two oldest boys are in Grand Rapids, and then my youngest is here. They've all been phenomenal at helping support Angie. Angie has just been incredible because I went from being the person that typically is a type A, kind of does everything, plans everything, handles everything, to teaching her how to do a lot of stuff, because not knowing if I was going to be able to with meds and chemo and all that. And ultimately my future, we don't know what that looks like long term. And when I went through the chemo, they give you all these meds, and they tell you, it'll probably get worse the next week, that week, things like that. Going through chemo, I never, ever had nausea. I never had vomiting, and I never had to take any of the medicine they gave me. And every nurse would ask, and I would tell them, and they're like, that is amazing. Like, you don't see that. And I was like, I pray a lot, and God is like walking with me on this. And so every opportunity I've had, I've tried to share that. And then we had a little bump in the road right before radiation, where they spotted a spot on my liver that they thought cancer had metastasized to my liver. So they halted my radiation before it started, because they wanted to do biopsies and all this. And I had so many people praying, and so many people through my Carrying Bridge site all over are praying for me and doing things. The MRI that they did before they did the biopsy, and they even put me in through a cardiac clearance and all this for the biopsy, miraculously showed that there was no mass. There was nothing to biopsy. It was simply fatty liver deposits. And I've never been so excited at somebody tell me I had a fatty liver than then. And my radiation oncologist did not really believe it. He called the radiologist to verify and talk to him, because he couldn't believe it. And the radiologist said, there's nothing to biopsy. There's nothing there. So my radiation then got back on track, started up, even though we had a delay. But it was a tough time of thinking, if it's a liver now, what do I do? So I feel like God worked there. Outpouring of love from people in the community, not just even local. I mean, our elders have been incredible. They have given me gifts with boxes of scripture about healing that I like every single day. They prayed for me. They brought meals. People have brought meals. People have helped financially, that have just blown me away. And it has just been an incredible thing. I've had young men that I've mentored, and people that I've led in youth that I haven't talked to in years, that are adults, text me and say, I've been following your story, and I want you to know what a difference you made in my life, and I'm praying for you. And there's just nothing better, because I feel like that's where I see God work, that sometimes you live your whole life and you didn't know, but there's been people that you didn't even realize, really care. You're like shocked, because you're like, I didn't even really realize you were even tracking. I had an elder text me when I was in the hospital and said, I want to give you encouragement, but how do I encourage the most encouraging person I know? And so it's just very humbling. And I think part of that humbling piece of this, and what God has had taught me, is to accept help. I would much rather help everybody else than to take that help. And I feel like one of the things that God has taught me is that that's part of being in the body of Christ. And sometimes you need it, and you need to accept it. And you need to let people bless you.
So are those ways then, all of those many examples that you gave to us, is that how God has encouraged you through this valley?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. He has, that's a lot of the ways that I've just seen him work. Other things that I feel like he's encouraged me is, I mentioned other churches. There are churches in Michigan, there are churches in Kentucky. People are wearing bracelets that say, my cousin she called me, and she spends hours a day in prayer with God. And she called me and she said, the Lord laid something on my heart today, and I think it's about you. And she said, I know it's about you. And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, the Lord is saying to me for you to remember in the midst of all of this, but God, that no matter what they tell you, like whatever's going on, whatever the statistics are, but God, because God is in your story and it's your story. And that's exactly what my surgeon that did this July surgery said to me when I walked into his office. I want you to stay off Google. Your story is not everybody else's story, and this is your story. Yeah. And so it lined up. What I felt like God was speaking to her lined up. So I started using this but God on everything. When I'd start to get stressed, the way I have hope is, but God, God's in control. He's got my story. These churches, some of the people are wearing bracelets that say, but God, to remind them to pray for me. Wow. And people are praying for me at certain times of the day. It's just a reminder. And it's so humbling. And it's just so incredible. Some of these people don't even know me except my story, or they've got a connection somehow to me through somebody. So that has been an incredible way. Matt Chandler, he had a message, and I didn't know anything about him as far as his story. Someone sent me a text and said, you need to watch this message. And it was about his journey with inoperable brain cancer and 13 years post now. Those things all just encourage you and just help you to know that it's not just the statistics, and it's not worth worrying, that God's got a plan. Right. We have friends that blessed us, took us on a trip to celebrate my chemo, and they took care of everything and just treated us like kings and queens. Wow. And when you've been through a long season like that, I mean, I feel like that's just so God working through them and encouraging me. And one of the things that's really come to me is I distinctly remember traveling when my kids were young, and I used to take my Gary Johnson cassettes with me back in the day in my car, and I would listen to messages again in my car. And there was a message on Hezekiah. And I distinctly remember the story of Hezekiah, and this would have been when my kids were like second grade, and they're 27, the oldest are 27. And that came to me, and I have been praying since it started for God to grant me more years to be a grandfather, to minister to my grandchildren. And I've been specifically praying, as you did with Hezekiah, will you grant and his story? And I feel like God brought that to me, of that memory of that message and Hezekiah as another way to encourage me. And so I think that's been incredible. And I think I'm starting to kind of dream again, because there's a lot of loss in this season. And so you lose track of, you kind of live from scan to scan. And so God's teaching me how to dream again and keep my eyes on him, and to continue moving forward through this process.
Well, but before we run out of time, can you give us a final word, Reid, on how do you continue to find hope in your cancer battle? Because you just said you're starting to dream again, and it's obvious that there's got to be a living hope for you as you keep plowing through a cancer battle.
Yep. I think the biggest thing for me that I've had to adjust is I was a planner. There is no planning anymore. I don't use the term someday very much anymore, because every day I try to live to the fullest now, because we're not guaranteed that. And none of us are, but when cancer enters the game, it's right in front of you, instead of like somebody that just, has a car wreck or has a heart issue, things like that. So I've worked really hard to live every day to the fullest, stop with the some days, trusting God every day and spending tons of time in his word. And my scripture that's really been kind of my just pillar is Isaiah 41:10, which is, so do not fear. I have to cheat with my note because I'm not Gary Johnson on this one. So do not fear, for I am with you, and do not be dismayed, for I am your God, and I will strengthen you and will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And that has been something that I just go over and over and over, and I pray that. And I've learned how to grieve the loss of parts of my life. My business is probably, I'm on disability now. So my business, potentially, I'm going to probably have to shut down the way it's looking. And that's hard because there's grieving that loss and what in some ways was my identity for a while. But I'm learning to embrace the future and what God's new future for me looks like. And in some ways it allows me to do lots more just ministering to people because I will have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
But it's been a difficult ride and a difficult road, but God's been there with me every single step and he continues to work.
Yeah. And absolutely. And God, who does not change like shifting shadows, is going to keep walking with you. You found him faithful years and years ago, and he's going to be faithful with you today and in every tomorrow of life. Absolutely. Yes. There are many times, there are 3 guys at the creek, you being one of the 3 that I pray for. All 3 of you are in cancer battles. And I many times will pray Jeremiah 32, verse 27 over you 3. And that verse says, I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is there anything too hard for me? So your cancer and Chuck's cancer and Jim's cancer is not too hard for our God. Nothing's too hard for him. And Isaiah 40:31, as we wrap up the month of April with that word hope, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Soar on wings like eagles, run, not grow weary, walk and not be faint. So in the midst of your fatigue with this cancer, we're going to believe that as you anchor your hope in your living God and ours, you will renew your strength. He promises. He promises. So, yeah. Hey, buddy, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to give us a good word. And you are proof in the pudding that people can really experience hope one day at a time. Yep.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, you are a blessing to all of us. And Reid, you just need to know, when you talked earlier about you wanted to respond differently in the presence of healthcare workers, nurses, technicians, doctors, I just want you to know it is so easy to see Jesus in you. And you are strong salt and bright light to a broken world, buddy.
I don't always get it right, but that's my goal.
There you go. God bless you.
Thank you.